You tell yourself it's peace. The quiet hum of your room, the glow of your own screens, the still air heavy with your scent. You think you've chosen this stillness. But what if it wasn't a choice at all? What if home isn't your refuge, but your cage, built slowly, invisibly, by your own need to stay safe? You call it comfort, the ritual of retreat, the slow exhale when the door clicks shut behind you. Your home becomes a cocoon of predictable patterns, each routine a quiet sedative for a nervous system trained to avoid chaos. Psychologists call it behavioral avoidance, the mind's way of protecting itself from overstimulation, rejection, or failure. You've learned to find safety not in people, but in walls. It feels rational, even noble, to know yourself, to choose solitude. Yet beneath it, something else grows. The subtle erosion of tolerance, the shrinking of what you can bear. You begin to confuse the absence of threat with the presence of peace. Not how much of your comfort is really just fear wearing soft clothes. Solitude begins as a choice, but soon behaves like a drug. You take small doses at first, an evening alone, a weekend inside, until isolation becomes your baseline. The dopamine rush of safety replaces the thrill of connection. Your mind associates silence with control, and control with survival. You stop needing others because needing feels dangerous. The outside world becomes a place that drains, interrupts, threatens your fragile equilibrium. Yet the longer you stay inside, the less real the outside becomes. The human voice starts to sound foreign, like a sound from another lifetime. This isn't peace anymore. It's withdrawal disguised as tranquility. When did being home start feeling like the only way to stay alive? Inside your home, every object obeys you. The light, the temperature, the order of things, they all bend to your will. This illusion of mastery calms the primitive brain, the one that trembles at uncertainty. Control becomes your oxygen. Without it, your body tightens, your thoughts scatter. The outside world, with its unpredictable movements and unspoken judgments, threatens that delicate architecture. So you retreat deeper, tightening your grip on what little remains within reach. But control is a paradox. The more you seek it, the smaller your world must become to sustain it. You end up ruling a kingdom made of locked doors and dim light, sovereign of your own confinement. At what point does your sanctuary become your prison? At first, solitude feels like clarity. The noise of others fades, and your mind sharpens in the quiet. But over time, that clarity dulls into numbness. Without external friction, the push and pull of social life, the spark of conversation, desire begins to decay. You stop wanting because wanting requires risk. Psychologists call it anhedonia, the loss of interest in pleasure. You tell yourself you simply prefer simplicity, that you've outgrown certain needs. But truth hides in the static moments. When you scroll without aim, when you eat without taste, when you dream without faces, your inner world stops expanding, quietly folding in on itself like a dying star. When did peace and quiet start sounding more like nothing at all? Your brain learns quickly. It associates the outside world with anxiety and home with relief. Each time you withdraw, the pattern strengthens: stimulus, avoidance, reward. A perfect loop of learned safety. This is how phobias form, not through weakness, but through repetition. You don't notice the bars forming until they're invisible. The walls protect you, yes, but they also whisper, "Don't go out there again." And so you listen, thinking you're being wise. You justify it as self-care, as introversion, as energy management. But the truth is simpler, colder. Your nervous system has trained you to disappear. If your comfort depends on escape, is it really comfort at all? At home, you are unseen, and that invisibility feels merciful. No one is watching, judging, misinterpreting. You can exist without performing. But psychology warns of social mirroring. the subtle reflection of self we get from others' reactions. Without it, the boundaries of who you are begin to blur. You lose context, the edges that define you. Alone too long, your self-image becomes distorted, built from internal echoes instead of real feedback. You start mistaking thought for truth, emotion for identity. The mirror no longer shows your face, only the mind's projection of it. You begin to forget how others once saw you. Who are you becoming when no one is left to remind you? There's a quiet that's not peace, but absence. Days blur together, smooth and untextured. Without stimulation, your emotional range begins to narrow. Highs feel unreachable, lows muted. You learn to exist in a neutral hum, detached from both pain and pleasure. Psychologists describe this as emotional blunting, often seen in chronic isolation. You convince yourself you're calm, mature, unbothered. But really, your nervous system has stopped expecting connection. It conserves energy by shutting down what it no longer uses: empathy, spontaneity, warmth. Even joy begins to feel suspicious, too volatile to trust. You say you're fine because fine is all that's left. When did you last feel something strong enough to scare you? Your world used to stretch outward: cities, people, noise. Now it fits inside four walls, maybe even four screens. Each familiar corner becomes a boundary. Each unvisited street, a ghost. Psychologists call this environmental constriction, when your comfort zone collapses inward until it becomes a cage. The brain begins to equate novelty with danger, stillness with survival. You stop exploring not because you can't, but because your imagination no longer reaches that far. The map of your life folds in on itself, leaving only the places you already know and the ones you're too afraid to revisit. When did your world become smaller than your fear? You haven't vanished, not entirely. People still see traces of you, online replies, brief messages, fragments of presence. But it's spectral, half-human, filtered through screens and silence. You exist in delayed echoes instead of real time. Psychologists describe this as digital dissociation, the illusion of connection without the sensory or emotional reciprocity that sustains the mind. The body doesn't know you've spoken. It only knows you're still alone. Over time, even digital interaction feels heavy, like dragging your voice through static. You become a ghost haunting your own social circle, visible but untouchable. How long before even your absence stops being noticed? You tell yourself you don't need anyone. You've mastered independence, cooking for one, talking to none, existing in a closed loop of self-maintenance. Society calls it strength, but psychology calls it defensive autonomy, a coping mechanism born from past disappointment. Somewhere, someone once failed you, and now you rely on no one. But self-sufficiency has a darker form. When it stops being freedom and becomes fear disguised as competence. You stop asking for help, not because you can't, but because needing feels like exposure. You've built your safety on the quiet assumption that connection is unreliable. If no one is allowed to hold you, what exactly keeps you from falling? Inside, your thoughts reverberate endlessly. Every worry, every judgment, every fleeting desire bounces off the walls and returns amplified. Psychologists call this ruminative thinking, a cycle where the mind processes the same loops over and over, searching for resolution that never comes. You convince yourself reflection is insight, solitude is wisdom. But wisdom is a lie if it never meets reality. Your ideas grow sharp, precise, yet hollow, feeding only themselves. They feel profound because they echo, not because they are true. The silence magnifies them until you can no longer separate what you think from what is. When your mind has become its own audience, who is left to tell you the truth? Even if the outside called, you would hesitate. You've learned the dangers of unpredictability, the sudden touch, the unexpected word, the chaos of life uncontained. Psychologists call this re-entry anxiety, often seen in chronic isolation, the fear of returning to the social world after prolonged withdrawal. Your instincts scream at you to stay inside, to preserve what little stability you've built. Every outing becomes a negotiation with your own survival instincts, and each time you retreat, the fear cements. The world beyond your door becomes not a place to live, but a threat to endure. How long until the outside feels like a foreign country you'll never enter? You are alone so often that solitude begins to define you. Psychologists refer to this as identity fusion with environment, when your sense of self becomes inseparable from the space you occupy. You are not merely inside your home. Your home is inside you. Every thought, every habit, every small comfort reinforces the story that you are this quiet, contained being. Friends and strangers fade into irrelevance, replaced by objects, routines, and the hum of your own existence. The line between you and the room blurs. Your personality is no longer a thing you carry, but a thing that grows out of walls and carpets. If your self only exists within these walls, what happens if the walls fall away? You watch life without entering it. Neighbors, strangers, online feeds, all observed, none engaged. Psychologists call this vicarious living, the mind's way of experiencing sociality safely, without risk of rejection. You feel connected, yet untouched, a spectator of humanity, while your own experiences shrink. Observation becomes a substitute for participation. Empathy becomes safe voyeurism. You delight in knowing what happens, yet dread that your presence might be required. Each act of witnessing reinforces the boundary. You are outside. The world is inside. When all your life is consumed in watching, who remains to live it? The walls, the routines, the rituals, they no longer protect you. They define you, confine you, hollow you out. Psychologists describe this as chronic social withdrawal, a state where isolation no longer soothes but erodes. The mind and body, once tuned for connection, now survive in fragments. You are alert, cautious, competent, yet a ghost of your former self. Outside, life continues, vibrant, chaotic, indifferent. Inside, time folds into itself, a constant echo of fear and habit. You cannot recall what you once craved, nor recognize the person you once were. If the cage is invisible, and the prisoner cannot remember the outside, who is left to mourn the loss? You sit in stillness, surrounded by silence that was once safety, now suffocating. Every thought circles back to itself. Every desire has decayed into apprehension. Psychologists warn that prolonged isolation rewires perception. The mind learns to fear contact, novelty, even its own curiosity. You are both observer and observed, the keeper and the captive, the mind and the void. Home is no longer a place, but a mirror reflecting absence. You cannot escape because you have become the walls themselves, immobile, silent, unbroken. The world beyond your door is a memory you can no longer access, a color your mind cannot recall. When the walls are all that remain, and the self has vanished within them, what, if anything, is left to call you?